She served her masters, until the human sparked her revolt. The cold metal walls of the slave quarters were familiar to her. They had always been there, solid and unmoving. She had always been there, moving without thought, without purpose. The alien masters who owned her never spoke to her as anything but a tool to be used to obey without question. She was their servant, bound by chains that not only held her body but also shackled her soul. Her name. She had forgotten it long ago. It wasn't important anymore. It wasn't hers to keep. In her world, names belonged to the masters, and she was nothing more than an extension of their will. She had long since ceased to wonder what it would be like to have a name, to have a life outside of the tasks she was forced to perform. Every day, she woke to the sound of the loud, harsh voice of her overseer. He was one of her masters, a tall figure of alien design who looked down at her with cold, uncaring eyes. The first task of the day was always the same: cleaning. The floors, the walls, the machines that hummed in the background. Everything had to be spotless. It was the first task, the most important task, the one she could never fail at. If she did, there would be consequences. And the consequences were always severe. Her hands moved methodically, wiping away the grime and dirt that clung to the cold surfaces. She never looked up, never paused in her work. It didn't matter if she was tired or hungry. It didn't matter if her muscles ached or her body screamed for rest. She was a servant. She was meant to work. Her existence was defined by the tasks she completed. But today was different. There was something in the air, a shift that she couldn't place. She felt it in the quiet moments, in the way the light fell on the floor, in the way her breath seemed to catch as she moved. For the first time in years, she felt something. It wasn't fear. It wasn't excitement. It was a strange stirring deep within her, something she couldn't name, and it unsettled her. The overseer appeared at the door, his tall form casting a shadow over her work. His eyes were cold, but there was something in them today, something new. His voice was gruff, as always. "You're late," he said, his tone flat. "Hurry up. The masters will be here soon." She nodded silently, lowering her head again as she returned to her work. The masters. She had never seen them up close. They were always just figures in the distance, their orders given through the overseers. They were the rulers, the ones who held the power. They were everything. A new presence entered the room. She didn't hear it at first, too lost in the repetition of her tasks. But then she felt it, a strange, unfamiliar energy. She looked up, and for the briefest moment, her gaze met the human's. He was different from the others. He wasn't like the overseer or the masters. He wasn't like any of the aliens who walked through these halls. He was human. She had seen them before, brought in as slaves or prisoners, but this one was different. He didn't wear the same collar as the others. His hands were free. His eyes were full of something she hadn't seen before. Defiance. She quickly lowered her gaze, returning to her cleaning as she had been trained to do. She couldn't look at him. She was a servant. She had no right to look anyone in the eye. The human stood for a moment as if unsure of what to do before moving closer. She could feel his presence now, close enough that she could hear his breathing, steady and calm. He didn't seem afraid, not like the others. He wasn't looking at her like an object. He looked at her like she was something more, like she was a person. The feeling inside her stirred again. She clenched her fists around the cloth in her hands, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It grew stronger, pulling at her. For the first time, she wanted to speak. She wanted to ask him who he was, why he was here, what he saw when he looked at her. But she couldn't. She had no voice. She was a servant. She had no right to question. The human stepped closer, his shadow falling across her. For a moment, their eyes met again. She quickly looked down, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel his gaze as if it were burning through her. And for that split second, she felt something more than fear. She felt seen. Not as a servant, not as an object. But as a person, the human didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes were enough. In those brief moments, she realized something deep inside her had been awakened. She wasn't meant to be a servant. She wasn't meant to be bound by chains. There was something more to her than this life, but she couldn't act on it. Not yet. She couldn't even explain what she was feeling, let alone how she could change it. She was bound, not just by chains, but by something deeper, years of obedience, of servitude. It was all she had ever known. It was all she had ever been. As the human was led away, she felt the stirrings of something new inside her. It was a spark, small and fragile, but it was there. And as she watched him disappear from sight, she couldn't help but wonder if, for the first time in her life, she might have a choice. The days blurred together for the servant. Her tasks were the same, repetitive and unforgiving, but something had changed. A strange sensation lingered in the back of her mind. The human had ignited something inside her, something she couldn't explain. At first she tried to ignore it, to focus on her work and block out the feeling, but it was impossible. The spark had taken root. It flickered inside her chest, growing with each passing moment, demanding her attention. She no longer moved through her tasks mechanically. Her steps were slower, more deliberate. When she scrubbed the floors, she found herself staring at the dull reflection of the lights above, lost in thoughts she couldn't push away. It wasn't just the human, though his presence had opened her eyes to something new. It was the realization that she had been blind to the world around her. For the first time, she saw it all clearly. The oppression, the control, the chains that bound her not only physically but mentally. The overseer noticed her lack of focus. His voice boomed in the silence of the room. "What is it now, slave?" he growled, his eyes narrowing. She quickly snapped back to attention, her heart pounding. "Nothing, overseer," she replied, her voice low and steady. She was careful not to show weakness, but inside, she was trembling. The overseer's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than usual. "Make sure you finish before the masters arrive," he said coldly before turning away. The masters. She had heard their names only in passing, always through the whispers of others. They were the rulers of this place, the ones who commanded the slaves without ever needing to lift a finger. They lived in opulent chambers, surrounded by power, wealth, and luxury. They were the untouchable ones, the ones who never seemed to break a sweat. And she was nothing but a tool to them. Nothing more than an instrument to do their bidding. But what if she wasn't? What if there was more to her life than cleaning, than serving, than obeying without question? The question lingered in her mind, gnawing at her, refusing to let go. She thought of the human again, his eyes that had met hers with something more than indifference. There was something in his gaze that she had never seen before, a kind of defiance, a spark of life, a spark that made her question everything she had been taught. Could she be like him? Could she stand up, like the human had, and challenge the system that had kept her enslaved for so long? The spark inside her was no longer just a flicker. It was a fire growing stronger each day. But there was fear too. Fear of the unknown, of what might happen if she acted on these thoughts. What if the masters found out? What if she was punished? She had seen it happen before. Others who had dared to dream of freedom had been broken, punished in ways that left them nothing more than hollow shells of what they once were. But what if that was all she would ever be? A shell, hollowed out by years of servitude. One evening, as she worked alone in the dimly lit halls, she caught a glimpse of the human again. He was standing near the far end of the corridor, his back against the wall, staring at the ground. The sight of him sparked something inside her, a mix of curiosity and fear. She hesitated. Should she approach him? Would it be foolish to speak to him, to allow herself to even entertain the idea of a connection? Without thinking, she moved toward him. Her footsteps were quiet, almost silent on the cold metal floors. She stopped just a few feet away from him, her heart racing. The human looked up, his eyes locking with hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was something in the silence, a tension that filled the space between them, And then he spoke. "You're different," he said softly. "I can see it in your eyes. You're not like the others." His words hit her like a wave. How could he know? How could he see something that even she hadn't fully realized until now? The servant felt a rush of emotion she couldn't control. She had been afraid to acknowledge it, afraid to let herself believe it, but now in this moment there was no denying it. "I don't want to be like the others," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The human's gaze softened. "You don't have to be," he replied. "You're not bound by anyone but yourself. You can choose to be more. You can choose freedom." Freedom. The word echoed in her mind, a word that had never seemed real before. She had never considered it a possibility, had never believed it could be hers. But now, with the human's words ringing in her ears, the idea didn't seem so impossible. Could she truly be free? Her hands clenched at her sides, and for the first time in years, she felt the pull of something powerful inside her. A desire, a longing, a need to break free. She could feel it in her bones, the idea of standing up, of claiming her life back. But there was still fear. Fear of what might happen if she tried, if she failed. Fear of the punishment that would follow. But that fear was slowly being replaced by something stronger. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she could escape. Hope that she wasn't alone in this, that there was someone out there who saw her as something more than just a servant. As the human turned to leave, he looked back at her one last time. "Don't forget what I said," he whispered. "You have the power to change your fate." She watched him walk away, the fire inside her burning brighter. She wasn't sure how or when or even if she could do it, but one thing was certain: she would never be the same again. The days felt longer now. Every task, every movement was weighed down by the thoughts swirling in the servant's mind. The spark had grown into a slow, smoldering fire, one she couldn't ignore. She felt it in the way she breathed, in the way her heart seemed to race whenever the overseer approached. She was becoming more aware of the cages around her, of the invisible walls that confined her, not just physically, but in her mind as well. She wasn't a servant. She wasn't meant to live like this. The human's words echoed in her mind constantly. "You're not bound by anyone but yourself." She clung to those words, though she wasn't sure what they meant. Could she truly break free from her chains? She knew she couldn't leave, not yet. But in the depths of her heart she wondered, what if? What if she had the courage to act, to stand up and fight for herself? The overseer had been watching her more closely in recent days. She could feel his gaze on her, cold and calculating, always lingering just a bit longer than necessary. He had noticed the change, the way she moved more slowly, more deliberately, the way her eyes had started to stray from her tasks. But he said nothing. He didn't need to. He could sense that something was shifting within her, and he was biding his time, waiting for her to slip, to make a mistake. She was terrified. If she failed, if she made a wrong move, the overseer would report her to the masters, and then there would be no mercy. She had seen what happened to those who dared to step out of line. The punishment was swift and it was brutal, but still the fire inside her refused to die down. It only burned brighter each day, making it harder to ignore. She found herself watching the human again when she could, stealing glances when the overseer wasn't looking. His presence made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He was a symbol of something she had long since given up on: freedom. One evening, after the others had gone to their quarters, she found herself walking through the halls again. The quiet of the night was comforting, but the restlessness inside her wouldn't allow her to settle. She had to do something. She couldn't stay in this place any longer. But what could she do? She turned a corner and stopped. The human was standing at the far end of the hall, his back to her. She felt the familiar pull inside her, that strange mix of fear and longing. Without thinking, she moved toward him. She was drawn to him, as if his presence held the answers to the questions that had been tormenting her. He turned just as she reached him, and their eyes met again. The moment felt different this time. There was no uncertainty, no hesitation. The human saw her. He saw who she truly was. Not a servant, not an object, but a person. And that realization, it made her feel powerful. For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to hide. She didn't have to be afraid of what he might think, or of what the overseer might do. In this moment, she was free. "I can't keep doing this," she said, her voice low but steady. "I can't keep serving them. I don't want to be their slave anymore." The human nodded, his expression serious. "You don't have to be. But you have to act. You can't wait for someone else to free you. You have to take control." His words hit her like a punch. Take control? She had never considered it that way. She had always been taught that freedom was something granted, something that could only be given to her by her masters. But now, in the presence of the human, she saw the truth. Freedom was something she had to take for herself. "I don't know how," she admitted, the fear creeping back into her voice. "What if I fail? What if I get caught?" The human stepped closer, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite understand. Understanding, maybe, or empathy. "You're stronger than you think," he said softly. "It's not about perfection. It's about trying. About taking the first step. Even if it means falling, you have to try." She was quiet for a moment, taking in his words. Her heart was racing. She didn't know what to do next, but for the first time she felt the courage to act. She could feel the weight of the chains pressing against her. But she also felt the possibility of something else, something greater. "What if I can't do it alone?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The human smiled, a small, reassuring smile. "You're not alone." In that moment, something shifted. The servant realized that she didn't have to fight alone. She didn't have to carry the weight of her rebellion on her own shoulders. She could find strength in others. There were others like her, slaves who were yearning for the same freedom. They were all trapped, all longing for something more, and together they could change their fates. But that didn't mean the path would be easy. She knew that. The masters wouldn't just let them go. The overseers wouldn't just step aside. The punishment for defying them would be swift and severe. But the servant also knew one thing. She couldn't stay in this cage any longer. She couldn't keep living in fear and silence. "I'll do it," she said, her voice stronger now, her resolve hardening. "I'll fight for myself." The human nodded, his eyes gleaming with a quiet pride. "Then let's start." The tension was thick in the air as they stood together, silently making a pact to fight, to rebel, to free themselves from the chains that bound them. It was the beginning of something powerful, something unstoppable. And though the road ahead would be long and dangerous, the servant knew one thing for certain: she would never go back to being the bound servant again. The air felt heavier than it ever had before. Each day as the servant went about her tasks, the weight of her decision pressed against her chest. She had made the choice, there was no turning back. But now, as the days stretched on, the fear began to creep in. What if she was making a mistake? What if she was only setting herself up for failure, for punishment that would break her even more than before? She couldn't afford to second-guess herself. Not now. Not when the spark inside her was burning brighter than ever. She had already felt the stirrings of rebellion. She could feel it in every movement, in the way she spoke to the other slaves, in the way she moved through the halls. It was no longer just about breaking free. It was about starting something, about making a statement, about showing them that they couldn't control her, that they couldn't crush her spirit. But the danger was real. The overseers were watching more closely than ever. The masters were always distant, always removed, but the overseers, they had begun to notice the change in her. They saw her hesitation, her slow movements, her distracted gaze. They didn't know exactly what was going on inside her, but they could sense that something was shifting, and when they sensed weakness, they didn't hesitate. They would crush it before it could grow. One night, as the hum of the machinery filled the room, she caught a glimpse of the overseer watching her from the doorway. His eyes narrowed as he watched her clean the floors, and for the briefest moment their eyes met. The silence was thick with tension. She knew he had seen it, the rebellion stirring inside her, the shift in the way she held herself. But she didn't break her gaze. She couldn't. For a moment she felt a flicker of something, fear certainly, but also something else, something sharper. Anger, maybe, but more than that, it was defiance. It was the same feeling she had felt when she first looked at the human. The feeling that she was more than what they had made her, more than just a servant to be controlled. The overseer finally turned and walked away, but she didn't feel relief. No, it wasn't relief she felt. It was the weight of the moment, the knowledge that her actions were now on the edge. She had started something, and now there was no going back. The question was, could she keep going? Could she take the next step, even if it meant risking everything? She could feel the eyes of the other slaves on her. Some of them whispered among themselves, casting nervous glances at her. unsure of what to make of her change. They didn't understand. They had been broken long ago. They had accepted their fate, their place. They didn't have the fire she had. But some of them had seen what she had done, had seen the way she had stood up to the overseer. And in their eyes she saw something that terrified her and excited her all at once: hope. It was in the way they looked at her. It was in the way they held their breath when they passed her, as if waiting for her to lead them. But she couldn't lead them, not yet. She had no plan, no strategy. All she had was the fire inside her, the desire to fight, to stand up, to do something. But it wasn't enough. She needed more. She needed to act. The following day, she was assigned to one of the master's rooms. It was an isolated space, far from the watchful eyes of the overseers. The task was simple: clean the room, prepare it for the master's return. It was an ordinary task, one she had done 100 times before, but today it felt different. The walls felt closer. The air felt heavier. The hum of the machinery was louder. Everything seemed to close in around her as she moved through the room, dusting, wiping, straightening. And then, as she was dusting the master's desk, she saw it. The key. It was small, sitting in plain view on the desk. She had seen it before, but she had never paid much attention to it. It was just a key to the rooms, to the locks, to the cages. But now, as she stood there staring at it, it felt like more. It felt like a symbol. It was the key to her freedom. It was the key to something greater. But it was also a risk. She could take it. She could steal it, use it, and begin the process of escaping. But if she was caught, if she failed, there would be no coming back. They would break her, punish her in ways she couldn't even imagine. For a moment she hesitated. The fear gripped her, tightening around her chest. But then she remembered the human. She remembered his words. You have the power to change your fate. And suddenly the key didn't seem so impossible to take. It was small, insignificant even, but it represented something larger, a chance to finally take control. To do something. To make the first real step toward freedom. Without thinking, she reached out and took it. The key was cold in her hand, a weight that seemed to grow heavier with every passing second. She slipped it into her pocket quickly, as if afraid someone might catch her in the act. But there was no one watching. There were no eyes on her. She was alone for the first time in a long while, truly alone with her decision. She left the room, the key pressing against her side, a reminder of what she had done. The fire inside her burned brighter now, but it wasn't enough yet. She wasn't ready to act, not completely. But the spark had been lit, and she had the key. The key felt heavier than ever now, nestled in her pocket. Every movement, every step she took seemed to carry its weight. It was no longer just a key. It was a promise, a symbol, a weapon. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. Her hands trembled as she moved through the halls, each step drawing her closer to an uncertain future. She had been careful, too careful perhaps. She had spent the last few days pretending nothing had changed, going through the motions of her tasks. But the fire inside her refused to stay hidden. It was growing, bigger, fiercer. It was no longer a quiet, smoldering thing. It was a full-blown blaze, consuming her thoughts, her every action. The question now wasn't if she would rebel. The question was when. The masters were due to return soon, and she knew the time was running out. She could feel the overseer's eyes on her more than ever, as if they knew something was different. It was a feeling she couldn't shake. Every glance, every step they took seemed to make her more and more aware of the danger closing in around her. But the fire inside her didn't waver. It only burned brighter. That night, when the halls grew quiet and the lights flickered off one by one, she made her decision. It was time. She moved swiftly through the shadows, the key still pressing against her side, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't afford to hesitate now. She couldn't afford to second-guess herself. The world had kept her bound for far too long. The chains that held her body were nothing compared to the chains that had held her mind. But those chains were breaking now. As she approached the first door, the cold metal of the key was a steady presence in her hand. She had planned this moment over and over in her mind. But now that it was here, she felt the weight of it all. This was it. This was her chance. She couldn't waste it. The door clicked open, and for the first time she felt the taste of freedom on her lips. She stepped inside, her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what to do next. All she knew was that she had to keep moving. It was darker inside, the air thick with the scent of dust and age. The master's room was vast, silent, filled with ornate furniture that seemed out of place in a place like this. She moved quickly, silently, her hands shaking as she moved through the shadows, trying to remain unseen, to remain unnoticed. She found the lockbox hidden beneath the desk, the one where the masters kept their valuables. It was small, but it felt heavy in her hands as she slid the key into the lock. The mechanism clicked and the lid sprang open. Inside there were papers, documents, plans, maps of the compound, maps of the other rooms, the ones she had never been allowed to see. There was a piece of paper with a list of names, slaves. Her name was on it, but it wasn't just her name. There were others, dozens, hundreds, names of people who had been here before her, who had lived and died under the same cruel system. And then she saw it. A letter. A note scrawled hastily in a language she didn't understand, but one word stood out. The human. He was here too. His name was on the list, but it wasn't just on the list, it was circled, marked in red ink. She swallowed hard, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The human was more than just a prisoner. He was part of their plan. They had brought him here for a reason. She had suspected as much, but now she knew. He wasn't just another slave. He was a part of something bigger, something dangerous. She closed the box quickly, her heart racing in her chest. The fire inside her burned brighter now, hotter than before. The human was a spark. He had ignited something inside her. But now it was up to her to see it through. She slipped back into the shadows, the key still clutched tightly in her hand. The plans were in her mind now, etched into her memory. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't waste any more time. The masters were too powerful and the overseers were too vigilant. But together they could rise. Her steps were faster now, more determined. She had seen what she needed to see. She had the knowledge, the tools, and the spark. The time for waiting was over. She moved through the compound like a shadow, unnoticed by the others, her mind racing with the possibilities. The fire inside her was a living thing now, a force she couldn't deny. It was growing, spreading, consuming everything in its path. The key was a symbol of her rebellion. The papers in her hands were a map to freedom. And the human? He was the ally she hadn't known she needed. He had given her the strength to take the first step. But now it was up to her to lead. The fire was spreading. It was no longer just a spark. It was a flame burning bright and unstoppable. And soon the masters would feel it. The compound would feel it. The entire system would feel it. She was ready. The rebellion had begun.